What a great treat to be here and have all of you here this evening. Chad and I are not at all tired from the midnight call last night or the days leading up to the exhibition.
No.
We're going to get all of our energy tonight, okay?
Yes, indeed.
But we're going to sit. But we are going to sit.
We're going to sit. Like we did on the road.
Some of the time.
Yeah.
So we are going to, as Rod said, share with you a little bit about our epic adventure and a little bit about the origin of this project, the idea, the development from idea into an exhibition, which I know a few of you have seen. I hope many of you have seen, maybe most.
How many of you have seen it?
Everybody's seen it? Wonderful. So now those of you that haven't seen it, don't you feel bad? You need to get into the galleries. We won't keep you long. We'll give you time to get into the galleries. I was reflecting actually this afternoon with Chad about the very beginnings of the idea for State of the Art, which go back a couple of years, maybe 5, when Alice Walton and I first met in 2009. And I posited this idea that in the middle of the country, in a brand new Museum of American Art, there might be space to reconsider the landscape of contemporary American art. That if we were successful at building a museum here that could engage people in a conversation about American art, its history, its past, its present, its future, that we might have a unique perspective, a unique vantage point, a place to add to that conversation as it regards contemporary art. That idea lay dormant as we got very busy building this museum. I hope you like the museum. And
They like it.
They like it. We circled back to the idea about a year after the museum had opened, and we had achieved something that we found remarkable and remarkably rewarding, which was true engagement of our community, of the world, of interested art participants. People like yourselves who came to this museum, who engaged in conversation, who listened and learned and asked questions and talked and came to our programs and asked for more information, more programming, more talks, more films, whatever. And it was so inspiring that we very quickly turned our attention back to that idea. And I want to read something very quickly to you, which is from a set of notes that I prepared for the board of this museum in 2012, the year after we opened the museum, circling back to this idea of taking a broader look at contemporary art practice in this country. And it's, to me, 2 years on, remarkably prescient, but even more than patting myself on the back, I want to pat our board and Alice Walton on the back for recognizing something in this kernel of an idea and saying, absolutely, go for it, do it well. So this is what I wrote to the board, and this I presented in November of 2012. Goal: to tell the American story in a richer and more complete way than ever before, and to do that more thoroughly, with contemporary American art, what we've been doing in the permanent collection with historical American art. Why? Because strange as it seems, contemporary arts can often seem the most distant from us, the most difficult to understand, and we have an opportunity or responsibility to correct that, to allow art to play a role in contemporary conversation, the issues and themes that are relevant in our own time. Those who were here got a small taste of this when we opened the museum with an exhibition we called Wonder World. Some of you might remember Wonder World when we opened. Thank you. Couple more things in the notes. This will be could be our first major contemporary exhibition organized from beyond our own collection and scale. It should be larger than most of our exhibitions that occupy our temporary exhibition suite of galleries.
I think we got that.
Could take over both our post-war building and our temporary exhibitions, and may, in fact, here's where I was really prescient, may, in fact, go beyond the walls of the museum, outdoor public spaces, community, ?
Look at that. So you're a genius, Don.
No. The board was, though, and the board said to me after reading this, absolutely, go for it. How are you going to do it? And then I looked blankly back at them and said, I have no idea. I have no idea. And so what we did was we started testing out ideas. We said, first of all, we'll probably have to go beyond usual curatorial practice. Chad, describe what usual curatorial practice is.
Well, it depends on who you are. But in many cases, you could, I don't know, pull up a couple names on the internet, do some Google searches for some recent exhibitions by other people, and then cull a list of names that everyone has read and seen over and over again, and then re-scramble them and pull out the names and try again.
Because one, they've been vetted, so it's easy. You know you're going to be successful and you get it done quickly, right?
Right.
Not what we were going to do. So instead, we again, going back to this idea of a unique vantage point, being here in Bentonville in Northwest Arkansas, of looking more broadly across the country, expanding the story beyond those names that were well known, and really delving more deeply into the story of what contemporary art consists of in this country. And so the idea was to get out on the road, see all places where art is being made. That is to say, not just Brooklyn or New York or Los Angeles or San Francisco. No offense to those places, but those are not the only places where artists live and work. And so we devised a multi-tiered process in which we would first talk to our colleagues, people that live and work in every locality, every community of artists across the country, and begin a conversation about what's happening in your region. Who are the artists of note that are really making a ripple here that we may not have heard of, that may not have gotten under those lists, et cetera?
Yep. So that key question that we asked, and this developed. This was, you can tell this is an idea that was iterative. It changed and evolved over time. And I'm really proud of that. But, you know, we started out asking, who are the best emerging artists in your area? We got mostly lists of young artists. And that's good and fine. But does that represent a true cross-section of the working artists in this country? Probably not. So we decided to ask, who in your region is under-recognized for what they do? Under-recognized. And what that means is that person who you're asking has connected personally with that work, has made a spark, a connection, and they believe, and they become an advocate for, the fact that that person deserves more, deserves a greater conversation, and deserves more from all of us, more attention. And that question became a real hallmark for us, and it's reflected in the show. The range of artists in the show of ages, 24 to 87.
Worthy of our recognition, worthy of our recognition. I do want to acknowledge, and I don't think Rod was able to, but in our audience tonight are many of the artists. And could we have the lights up and just ask our artists to wave, stand, or make themselves known? State-of-the-art artists, please make yourselves known. I'll tell you all what a thrill it is to have seen these artists in their communities, in their studios, in their homes in many cases, and then to see them here and receive some of that worthy recognition that Chad was just describing. It's really a great thrill to have this process be complete and have all of you begin to recognize the talent, the greatness of the artists that we're presenting to you tonight. So back to the story. Yep. After having had these conversations with some 800 of our colleagues in every region across the country, we developed a list of something like 7,500 names, maybe 8,000 names, of artists that were considered...
Those were dark days. Those were really dark days.
They were busy days. Under-recognized artists worthy of our attention in every corner of the country. And Chad and I spent months looking through everything we could find about these artists. And thank you, artists who have websites, who have images of your work, who have good bibliographies of things written about your work, because we were able to find out a little bit about each of you, and it was really very helpful. From that process, we then set about prioritizing. If we were able to go to this region, who might we want to see most? And from those conversations, we narrowed the list, and it was with some difficulty to narrow that long list to a shorter list of about 1,100 artists, of which we did manage to get to see about 1,000. And I'll just share with you the map of where we went on our several trips. These are a few of our trips. And the reason as they come up, the reason each of them is shown as concentric rings is we would typically fly into a region wherever there was an airport and rent a car and drive day after day after day to 8 or 10 or 14 studios a day to make sure that we could capitalize and see as many of these worthy artists that we could see in a region. And you'll notice we didn't get everywhere, and I had a crisis moment about last January.
A crisis moment. This was a meltdown. This was a meltdown.
Where I realized that we weren't going to be able to go absolutely everywhere, and it was very painful for me to acknowledge that. But the salvation was I realized this is the beginning. This is the beginning of something that we want to foster, that we want to encourage, maybe challenge all of us, our colleagues, all of us to see more artists, to recognize, to pay more attention to the artists that live and work among us wherever we are, because they have something valuable to contribute to our lives, to our conversations, to our futures.
Yes, absolutely. And beautifully stated, Don. Yes, it was a meltdown that turned into a breakthrough in terms of our thinking for the project. No, we couldn't get everywhere. But you know what? There are people everywhere who can. So, you can get out to your local communities, and working together, we can actually see all the artists out there. It's possible,
Absolutely.
Right? But we can't do it alone. And so what's represented in the galleries is the tip of the proverbial iceberg. There are artists in every community across this United States. They are the people, I like to say, buying bananas next to you in the grocery store. They want to have a conversation with the works that they make, and hopefully we've fostered a few to begin in the galleries behind us.
Okay, so let's get on to the journey. So once we did all the preliminary research, we hit the road. We went on 52 trips. We traveled 114,000 miles, 176 towns and cities, 970 some artists, and here's what we discovered. Here's Chad and me in St. Louis early on, so we look fresh. Our shoes look like they still have soles on them. We look like we enjoy each other's company. There's a great idealism in this moment. It quickly degenerates. No, it doesn't actually. We get more and more inspired. We get more energized. We are physically exhausted after 700 or 800 or 900 visits.
Speak for yourself.
But it is absolutely energizing every single day. So in each case, we would knock on the door or ring the doorbell of a studio or a home that we intended to visit. And it was a bit like, I say this in the catalog, it was a bit like my sister's favorite childhood game called Mystery Date. The door opened, and neither the artist nor we knew quite what to expect, because in most cases, the artist didn't know what it was going to be. What was this? What was the reason for this visit? We had traveled thousands of miles across the country to a stranger's home, and we were inviting ourselves in for a conversation about their work, about the intimacies of their work and their practice.
I write about this too in my essay. It's Catalina Delgado Trunk here. You may have seen Catalina Delgado Trunk's cut paper, beautiful papel picado works in the show.
Yes.
Catalina, gracious, beautiful Catalina, answered the door, brought us into her beautiful home, showed us her personal collection. Gave us tea. We sat in chairs. I'm sitting there with a camera. She doesn't care. We spend 45 minutes going through her home, and then we get to the exit, and she shakes our hand, and she's like, "It was so nice of you to come by. Now, what are you doing here?
Who are you, and what are you doing?"
Yeah. Who are you, and what are you doing here?
It was remarkable. So the mystery date worked out in many cases. We had great conversations with the artists. Thank you all. It was a very special place to be, in the home or in the studio of an artist, in the place where they create, in the magic, the cauldron of that catalytic experience of creation, and the openness with which, the generosity with which the artists greeted us and gave us their stories, their life stories, their family stories, the stories of their passions, how they came to be an artist. And I've told some of these stories myself. I gave a TED Talk a few weeks ago, and I see Randy Regier sitting here in the front row. And these incredible life stories that lead people like Randy and all of you to make art, to be compelled to communicate with us through the brilliance of your work. And it was remarkable every single day, regardless of how we felt about the art. Because in some cases, we didn't love the art. We didn't think it was meritorious, but it was the experience of being in that space with the artists themselves, talking about it, that made this very different than sitting in an office, looking at a screen, reading a list of names. Very, very different indeed.
The process informs the exhibition. So you were talking about a conversation, Don. It all started with in-person conversations. It means something to have you and me in a space. It means something to have a conversation between us while we're standing there. And the work that we saw in that context that we brought back here, it speaks. It asks you to speak too. It asks you to turn to the person next to you and say, what is going on with this? Or, oh my God, I love this. Or, what in the world? And these questions, these sparks to conversation are incredibly important. This isn't art that pushes you away. It says, come in. I have something to say.
So speaking of what in the world, this was the studio in which a fox jumped on my head. I'm not sure why that happened. I don't actually remember it. I don't remember this one, but...
And look how placid you look. You're so calm.
It kind of felt good. It felt good, actually. But you'll notice that Chad and I are both carrying strange equipment in these photographs because we were amateur recorders. One of us carried a video camera, one carried an audio recorder, and we documented the conversations. One, because we knew we couldn't remember the nuances in the conversation we had with each and every person. We wanted to get it right when we talked again about these artists. But also it has become an incredible archive of this moment in contemporary art across the country because we have some 1,200 hours of this footage that really delves deeply into this country's art practice. Not only the 102 artists in our show, but another 800 and some that are not in the show.
So in 20, 30, 50, 100 years, we have this incredible snapshot of what American art is like right now. It's kind of mind-boggling to me, and I can't wait to see the kind of information and research that spins out of that.
So Chad mentioned some of the conversations we had after visiting each studio, and often, in most cases, we would leave a studio, get back in the rental car, and drive to our next appointment. And we had brief or not so brief moments to share and to talk about and mostly to debate what we had seen. And the good news is...
While I'm driving...
And I'm navigating.
Well, you're navigating. Siri's navigating. You're also there.
Yes. Yes, I was, as a matter of fact. And we had extraordinary debates from a variety of perspectives. Chad and I come from maybe a different generation.
Maybe.
Different upbringing, different educational background. I, for instance, have not appeared in the pages of Esquire magazine recently, but Chad has. You all seen it? At any rate, I was busy working while he was modeling, but that's all right.
Ever. It's not even on newsstands anymore. My 15 minutes is over, people.
At any rate, I do want to share kind of the tenor and maybe the context of those conversations. We began to talk a lot about, and this was an evolutionary thing, about what it was we were looking for. We knew from the outset that we were looking for the most compelling American art being made today. But what did that mean, and how did we define it? How did we know it when we saw it? And we began to talk about very loosely defined criteria, and they were these. They were engagement. Can you remember?
I can remember.
They were engagement, virtuosity, and appeal. And let me describe what those meant as we went through the journey. Or you can, Chad.
I can do it.
Engagement, let me start. We started with engagement, and after each visit, we talked about the degree to which each artist and their work, their practice, was engaged in ideas, in issues of the world, in their communities, in ways of thinking that were truly engaging, that manifest themselves in the work. This idea that art is not only about itself, art is not hermetic, but it is in fact connected to conversations, to ideas, to issues that are relevant in our world.
Yep. And these criteria, engagement, virtuosity, appeal, they became really broadly construed as the evolution of the project took hold. We started to expand these definitions of what engagement really meant. And the same is true of virtuosity. Virtuosity being the sort of manifest and skilled talent of the hand in manipulation of materials. But many artists, as you see in the exhibition, aren't using traditional materials anymore. And the virtuosity with that material, whether it be actual stuff or whether it's about creating conversation and discovery. Those were the criteria that we were thinking of. We're thinking about virtuosity.
Absolutely. And appeal, quite evidently from the word, was what kind of appeal would these works have for a broad audience? And particularly the notion of art that speaks generously to an audience. Again, that is not hermetic and closed and only speaks to a few who have studied critical theory or this or that, but art that really embraces an audience and a conversation with a viewer. That's what we were looking for.
Appeal is really an important criterion for evaluating the works of art that we were seeing, because I was so tired of going into exhibitions of contemporary art and feeling bored, or like I didn't understand, or like the thing was pushing me away, or feeling cold. Okay, I love fun, don't you? Right? So art is fun. I mean, there's something appealing about the art encounter. It can be fun, and it can also be meaningful, and it can be beautiful. I mean, the exhibition demonstrates that. We're not afraid of fun. We're not afraid of beauty. Those are legitimate entry points for the art encounter, and this exhibition argues that, and I think to success.
Absolutely. Thank you. We're glad to share the fun with you, the joy of making, the joy of creation, the joy of discovery. And discovery is part of the title of the exhibition, very much what we were experiencing and we were really anxious to share with the public. So much so that, look, I've proven that Chad was driving. There he is driving.
There I was.
We, from the road, we were asked actually by the Huffington Post if we would document our travels with a blog. And after I learned what a blog was, we began to blog about our journey. And it was great fun to be able to share the experience of the road. What we didn't anticipate was the moment that we began the blog, word was out. And so very quickly there was a pivot point, a shift from us going to artist studios and artists saying, who are you and why are you here, to, I've been reading or hearing about you. And then it snowballed. And then shortly thereafter, there was an article in Art News, which never covers exhibitions before they open, but a year before we opened, they covered our exhibition. And then the cover of the New York Times, not the cover of the art section, page A1, which, man, the cat was out of the bag. And I will tell a little story on Randy Kennedy, the brilliant journalist who wrote the story. Randy came to travel with us a couple of days in the Southwest in Arizona. And Randy, as a good journalist, a New York Times journalist, promised to keep his opinions to himself, to keep the conversation to a minimum, to not introduce himself into the conversation we were having with artists in their studios. And he obeyed that rule. He abided by it until one night at dinner after a couple of days in studios, and he said to Chad and me, well, what'd you think about so-and-so? And we said, well, tight-lippedly, we'll talk about that later. And he said, no, well, here's what I think, and here's why I think they should be in the show.
That took one whiskey for him to do that.
Yeah, maybe not even. Anyway, the cat was out of the bag. It was a wonderful shift, but suddenly we were fearful that artists would somehow be a little more guarded, a little less willing to share their stories, but they really weren't. It just changed their awareness of our project and the awareness of what might come thereafter. And so for about 4 months after this article appeared, we didn't find ourselves responding to the same 4 questions. What are you doing here? What is the outcome? When might I hear back from you? And can I send you additional images?
Right.
Okay. We're gonna take you through a couple of the, maybe the range of studio experiences that we had. Some of these are quite telling, and some of them were a little daunting. We won't tell you all of the fear-inducing stories that we experienced, but there were some, like this one. We were in Alabama.
Correct.
I don't remember.
Mississippi?
Mississippi. We were in Mississippi, and we arrived at the given address, and we found a derelict and boarded up and chained abandoned Coca-Cola bottling factory.
Yep.
A huge factory that was empty, abandoned. There were tumbleweeds, I think, flying through it. That's my memory anyway.
Literal tumbleweeds.
We drove to the we got to get out and unleash the chain that led us into this derelict place. We drove to the very end, and there was one bay of this abandoned building open. It was this one. And we took these photographs in case we were ever lost and they might find our images and could come send a search party. We went inside. This is what it looked like from the inside. And then we found the artist who was working in this space as a studio. And it was remarkable to see life happening in this abandoned place.
That's me, not the artist.
That's Chad. Checking out the space. Actually, Chad went to 3 or 4 rooms.
Yeah, you can see behind me, actually, there's some models here in the front and a painting there on the wall in the back. He had actually set up an entire exhibition of his work in this abandoned plant. I mean, really incredible and totally unexpected.
Remarkable. And just one extreme, but there were many, many types of studio spaces that we visited, and many different kinds of experiences to be had in these studios. Some of them thrilling and delightful, and some of them, as I mentioned, what would you say? Terrifying.
Yeah,
terrifying. Terrifying. We also encountered the winter of 2013. Anyone remember the winter of 2013? We do. So here we are in Philadelphia on the day after, I think, 18 or 16 inches of snow. And Chad looks really
Look how happy I am.
Really happy to be there in Center City. And we had great visits in Philadelphia despite the snow. But then by the time we got to Baltimore,
Holy Mother.
25 inches of snow in Baltimore, and we encountered this experience, which was me digging our rental car out of the parking space in which it had been snowed in.
So
part of my job
no. They need a context for this. Okay, so this followed a fight. We had a fight, and
what was the nature of that?
I'm from Georgia. Okay, I'm from Perry, Georgia. It doesn't snow, and if it does, it snows this much, and it's real fun, and we get on with our lives. Okay. This was crazy, and we woke up that morning at the hotel. The news says, if you don't have to go out, do not go out. It is dangerous. And so I go down to breakfast with Don, and I'm thinking, all right, we'll order our normal oatmeal, we'll have a chat, and then we'll sort of assess where we're at. And I'm like, Don, I feel like we might not be able to go out today. And Don is like, under no uncertain terms, we are going out right now.
Give me the keys, is what I said.
Yeah, give me the keys. I wouldn't drive. And I said, look, if we get stuck, you are shoveling us out.
I don't remember that part. I do not remember that part at all.
And to his great credit, we were at an artist studio here. We got stuck in the snowbank. And this is yet another example of an artist reaching out to us. We asked, hey, do you have a shovel? He didn't have one, but he sourced one from next door. And then I handed it to Don.
And how well did I do? How well did I do?
You did a beautiful job, Don.
I got us out of there, and we finished the day.
We did.
And in fact, one of the artists in our show, we visited at the end of that day after traversing this snowstorm and icy roads.
Makita Ahuja.
We were the only car on the road in the entire city, I'm afraid, but we made it.
We did.
I wanted to kind of peek into the studios, and if any of the artists are here whose studios are represented, I apologize because we're revealing secrets of your inner sanctum.
Sorry.
But we just wanted to show kind of the range because I think it was an extraordinary privilege to be in these studios of artists. Many of us will never have the opportunity to actually go into a working artist studio and see the way in which they think and work and make. But there was such a broad gamut of the way in which artists handle the materials and present themselves and arrange their lives around their art making. And so we just want to show, from the, what would you characterize this as? Anal retentive, maybe?
Obsessive.
OCD?
Obsessive.
Yeah, very well organized studios. And then some very well organized doll parts here, and then some not so well organized doll parts here. And
is Vanessa German here?
Is Vanessa here?
This is a peek inside Vanessa's studio. Don't tell her.
It's in her basement. In her basement. And then this happened, and then this happened. So I'll start the story, Chad, if you'll finish it.
Okay.
We were in Gainesville, Florida, visiting an artist who lives on a bit of a farm outside of the town. And the night before we arrived, their 3 mama goats had given birth simultaneously. I don't know why this happened. To 8 baby goats collectively. So 3, and 2 baby goats. And the entire time that we were in the house, which serves as their studio, there was a tiny little Chihuahua-like dog sitting on a chair, shivering and just nervous wreck. And Chad and I met a lot of artist pets in their studios.
So many pets.
So many great, memorable pets. But this one looked in dire need of help, maybe psychotherapy, I'm not sure. But we thought, after our conversation with the artist, both of us turned and said, is he going to be all right? I mean, get him help. And she explained that all night he had been awakened by the baby goats because they were taken out of the manger, I guess, and brought into the bathtub.
Manger?
I don't know where baby goats are born. I'm not sure. That was all I could come up with.
Wow.
I'm not good at goats. You're going to find out. You're going to find out how bad I am with goats. But the baby goats had been brought inside to the bathtub of the home all night, and the dog was panic-stricken because these one-day-old goats were bigger than he was, and there were 8 of them. So the dog was shivering all day long.
That goat right there is a day old. Is
That's
that
a day-old
not nuts?
goat.
That's crazy.
So we then were offered by the proprietress of the house, would you like to go meet the baby goats? And we said, sure, we've never met baby goats. So we went outside. I thought they were the most charming things. I've never been on a farm, but I thought they were absolutely charming. I picked up one because she invited me to, and the goat bleated and screamed and shrieked for about a minute, as loud as any one-day-old creature I could imagine.
Have you ever seen those videos on YouTube of goats screaming?
Yeah.
It is real.
Yeah, and Chad missed the opportunity to take a video, or viral video, but then I handed the goat to Chad because I could take no more, and the goat nestled up against his beard and loved him and calmed down.
Best friends forever.
So that was our goat story. One of our goat stories. Another goat story in Atlanta. We went to a goat farm and visited 3. Was it the goat farm? Is that
the goat farm is the name of the studio complex there. Yeah. Lots of goats there too.
Lots of goat experiences. So while we were out for these many months and many studio visits, Alice Walton, our intrepid board chair, kept hearing the stories and wanting more and more and more. And finally she said, I can't take it anymore. I have to go on some studio visits with you. And so Alice accompanied us for a couple of days in Alabama and had some wonderful experiences. Here we are with Celestia Morgan, a young artist in the exhibition. Celestia's 2 photographs are in the South Gallery, and we had some wonderful conversations. And Alice, like Randy Kennedy, did a great job of keeping her opinions to herself for
at
about
the beginning.
3 or 4 minutes, I think. 3 or 4 minutes. Yeah, and then contributed wonderfully to the conversation. And we had some very spirited, wonderful debates to contribute to our ongoing process. We just wanted to share, and for those of you who've seen the exhibition, this will not be a spoiler alert. For those of you who have not, close your eyes and ears and you won't hear anything you can see in the galleries. Just kind of to share a couple of stories about the individual artists, and these are just literally a few, but also to share why this exhibition, I think, is so resonant for Crystal Bridges, because we have an opportunity to present, not only from this vantage point, but to present these contemporary works in concert with our historical collection, and to understand that contemporary artists do not work in a vacuum. They are well aware of our history. They understand their forebears, artists that came before, issues and ideas that precede them, and they are often availing themselves of all of that knowledge in the creation of their work.
That's right. And one of the things I'm most proud about being a part of this institution is that we tell an American story. And that story is complex and strange and interesting, and it invites, it invites, it uplifts voices that have traditionally gone unsung. And this exhibition, part of the impulse behind it was to illustrate that contemporary art is a part of that lineage, that the multi-voice narrative that has emerged in contemporary art is indeed a part of our country and the way that story has developed over time.
Absolutely true. And here's a great example. Vincent Valdez, a young artist working in San Antonio, Texas. Vincent greeted us in his repurposed fire station studio and proceeded to show us these works in progress. They were not finished at the time. They are now finished and proudly hung in the gallery. These very large-scale paintings, beautifully rendered, of contemporary Latino men living and working among him, people that he knows in many cases, that are in strangely floating poses. They look like they might be dancing or levitating or this or that, but in fact they refer to a bit of Texas history that Vincent himself researched and discovered, to his dismay, but also to his erudition, that in the history of Texas, in late 19th and early 20th century history, as many Mexican-American men were lynched as African-American men, and yet we don't know this part of our history. I lived in Texas for many years. I never once heard that about Texas history. And so he's presenting this bit of invisible history by updating it into contemporary life with these contemporary figures. They are no longer wearing nooses around their necks, and yet they might be in the pose of these individuals hung. And he emphasizes this by calling the series The Strange strangest fruit. Anybody remember the Billie Holiday song about the lynching of African Americans? So it's a very beautiful, poignant, subtle way into a very difficult chapter in history and bringing that historical moment into our present and talking about the lingering impacts, the kind of legacy of these invisible yet shared histories. And one of the most remarkable things about this body of work, and if you look at the painting on the left as an example, is the resonance with historic precedent. And here we have a work in our collection, a brilliant sculpture from 1876 by Edma Cadwallader, who in the post-Civil War moment is depicting an African-American subject in sculpture that in some ways reflects the same subject. Here is a freed man post-emancipation, but in the pose of someone who is still bound by these invisible bonds that are now no longer manifest. So if you look at this sculpture and turn it around, you see that the hands of the figure are no longer bound. He is quite literally free, but still very much affected by the legacy of slavery. Remarkable coincidence, but about a similar issue in a different century, a different time and place.
So we mentioned earlier, we exposed Vanessa German's studio, and when we met with her, many of you the artists in here may have met her yesterday. She's a force of nature, yes. Right? And when we met her in her studio, we experienced that force of nature firsthand. She spoke very directly and eloquently about her need to have a voice and the roots of her becoming an artist.
Vanessa, as Chad said, a force of nature, but Vanessa speaks very eloquently about the neighborhood in which she lives, Homewood, a neighborhood in Pittsburgh, an inner city neighborhood, very troubled by violence and drugs and a series of social ills. And Vanessa makes these beautiful sculptures out of found objects and recreated objects that she imbues with the power to protect children in her neighborhood, children at risk, children who have been murdered in her neighborhood. And this is a tradition, of course, that goes back centuries in many cultures of the world where art has that power. Art is given that power to protect, the kind of talismanic power of a work of art. And Vanessa brings that up to date, one, by making her work for the time and place in which she lives, but two, by creating a safe space, what she calls an art house, where children can come after school, be off the streets, and make art with her, make beauty where there is violence. And it's an extraordinary force in a community, a way of making art, a way of thinking about art and its powers that really literalizes the power of art to transform lives. Very remarkable figure, remarkable sculpture, and these are in the North Gallery. I hope you'll experience them. Flora Mace. You want to talk about Flora? Flora is an artist who works in Seattle, has been a force in the glass world for many years. She was one of Dale Chihuly's early studio assistants. And Flora and her partner, Joey Kirkpatrick, have for years pushed the boundaries of what glass as a medium can do in art making. And in the very recent years, in this newest body of work, Flora has designed a way in which to capture nature in art, to capture nature in glass. And if you know much about glass making, as I do from Toledo, glass burns at 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you put hot glass next to a carbon-based life form like a little plant, it will evaporate immediately. And Flora for years has sought ways to capture the essence of nature in glass. She has now devised a unique, wholly her own way of embedding individual plants by taking them apart leaf by leaf, petal by petal, root by root, encapsulating every element into a cold glass composite, and then re-sculpting the plant back together in 3 dimensions in layers of hot glass once the individual components are protected. That's the best I can describe it. I can't understand it. But she is a remarkable artist in a long tradition of artists who have tried to capture the beauty, the essence of nature. Think about all the botanical artists who have painted exacting studies of elemental forms. Think about all of us amateurs who have pressed flowers into books, and we lose the chlorophyll and the beautiful color and the form, the morphology of a plant. And Flora has captured these for probably millennia. If you know about glass, glass exists for centuries, and in fact, some of our oldest artifacts from art history are 3,000 and 4,000 years old in glass. So it's a remarkable way to capture and preserve both the beauty, but also the species that may not be around 3,000 and 4,000 years from now. Remarkable in its own work, but also remarkable in its relationship to works of art that came before it. Here at work from our collection by Martin Johnson Heade, another artist struggling and striving to create these memories, these encapsulations of works of nature in art.
And here's Sheila Gallagher. Is Sheila here? So talk about forces of nature. When I popped into Sheila Gallagher's Boston studio, she was in the middle of a project. A painting, she called it. This is Plastic Leela from 2013. It's in the galleries. And it's composed of melted plastic. Now, when you think melted plastic, I wonder how she did that. Well, let me tell you, okay? Sheila Gallagher goes on hunts all around her neighborhood in Jamaica Plain, visiting the recyclable bins that people put out to be taken away. And she culls all of the recycled materials and drags them back to her studio, where she then orders them by color. Then she takes the colored plastic and arranges it on cookie sheets, which she then takes out to her grill and grills. She grills the recyclable plastic, okay? She's there with a gas mask in the alley. She pointed out the window and said, "Look down there, there's the grill. That's where I do my art." And I kind of couldn't believe it. And then she started telling me about the other parts of her practice. Across the way from this work, you'll see in the gallery, is a painting of a bullhead, really beautifully, remarkably finely rendered. She made that painting with smoke. So in her studio, she's rigged up this, all I can call it is a contraption, four pulleys that her husband helped her build, that she manipulates the canvas like this in space, underneath which she has the flame, which she's manipulating to create really finely rendered, beautiful depictions. In Sheila Gallagher's practice, there's always this sort of balance between the sacred and the profane. It happens here, where the profane is this stuff that we throw out and don't think of anymore.
Chanel lipstick right here.
Yeah, this Chanel lipstick that you used up. And then it combines to create this really sacred and beautiful image that's actually descended from Hindu miniature painting. And the connections are manifest both in longer terms of art history, but also in shorter terms in our collection. This beautiful Maria Oki-Doing painting of a rose garden from 1901, similarly spread across the canvas and interested in the repetition of floral form.
So all in all, we had an amazing journey, an epic adventure, as Rod said, and came back to Arkansas with the daunting challenge of culling from 900 plus studio visits, an exhibition that we hoped would represent what we had seen, the best of what we had seen, the compelling voices of American artists, and as it turned out, thrillingly enough, not by any design, not by any preconceived notion, these are artists that work across this country as we had initially posited. They are artists from all walks of life, as Chad mentioned earlier, from the ages of 23, 24 to 87, from every kind of background. 11 of them were born outside of this country. 91 of them were born in this country. Many of them have moved for their practice, for their lives, for their spouses, and an extraordinary representation of exciting, compelling work being done across this country around important, relevant themes, ideas, issues that we all live and think about. And the most exciting exhibition that I've ever been a part of, and I hope that you all will ever experience. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.